People think wealth hides cruelty. It doesn't. It polishes it until it looks like a charm. That Christmas night, the Quinn estate glowed like a postcard. Snow fell in perfect, photogenic flakes while strings of golden lights wrapped around the porch. Columns. Inside, the dining room shimmered with candlelight and the low hum of expensive laughter. I sat near the end of the table, hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to blend into the white linen. My dad, Richard Quinn, raised his glass at the head of the table, his smile wide, his voice strong. To Samantha, he said, the pride of the Quinn family, the one who keeps our legacy alive. Guests clapped, champagne flutes chimed, and my sister's practiced smile widened under the glow of admiration. Before I continue this story, let me know what you are doing while listening in the comments below. Maybe you're making dinner or winding down after work. For me, I was trying to survive Christmas. My dad's business friends sat along both sides of the table, men in tailored suits and women in glittering dresses. They laughed too loudly, the way people do when they want to stay close to money. My mom floated between them, perfect hair, perfect posture, refilling glasses before they were even half empty. When one of the guests turned to me and asked politely, "And what do you do, Clara?" I smiled and said, "I'm an interior designer. My first project just finished last month." The woman nodded politely, but my dad chuckled. "Design," he said, swirling his drink, "sounds like expensive decorating. You should find something more stable. Look at your sister. Now that's ambition." The table laughed. The air felt thin. Samantha looked at me with that gentle, pitying smile she used when she thought she was being kind. Dad went on, his voice light, amused. "Maybe one day you'll find something real to do with your life." I stared at the centerpiece, a crystal bowl filled with white roses and floating candles. Their reflections shimmered in the glass, fragile and trembling. My mom placed her manicured hand on Dad's arm and said softly, "Don't tease her, Richard." But her smile didn't falter. Every conversation around me blurred into a low buzz. I'd been invisible most of my life, the middle child who always fell between someone's laughter and someone else's success. When Samantha became captain of the cheer squad, Dad bought her a car. When Aaron, the youngest, scraped by with C's, they called it potential. When I brought home straight A's, they said, "That's expected." I thought maybe adulthood would change things. It didn't. A waiter refilled my glass, the fizz snapping against the rim like tiny fireworks. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. I wanted to believe that being there meant I still belonged, but every smile in that room reminded me otherwise. Samantha leaned toward me, her perfume sweet and sharp. "Don't take it personally," she whispered. "Dad just worries you'll end up, struggling." I smiled politely, the way people do when they're holding back tears. The sound of forks against plates filled the silence that followed. My dad moved on to another toast, this one about family loyalty and the value of working hard for the name you carry. I almost laughed. My whole life, I had worked to earn a place at that table, but the seat was never really mine. When dessert arrived, a chocolate mousse shaped like a snowflake, I couldn't taste a thing. My mind replayed his words again and again, expensive decorating, not real work, maybe one day. The humiliation felt hot in my chest. I excused myself quietly and walked toward the grand staircase. No one noticed. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through the hall like a slow metronome counting down. Upstairs, I went into my childhood room where everything was untouched. The pale wallpaper, the framed photo of me at 12, holding a blue ribbon from a school art fair. That was the last time my dad had said he was proud. I opened the closet and pulled out the small overnight bag I had packed days before just in case. Inside were a few clothes, my sketchbook, and the cash I'd saved from freelancing jobs. I stared around the room one last time. The air smelled faintly of dust and forgotten perfume. As I stepped out into the hallway, laughter drifted up from below. My dad's voice rose above the others, confident and booming, filling the house like it always had. The same voice that once told me hard work mattered, as long as it looked the way he wanted. I reached the front door and hesitated for a moment. The wind howled outside, pushing flakes of snow against the glass. Behind me, no footsteps, no voices calling my name. I opened the door and stepped into the cold. The night air bit at my cheeks. My breath came out in soft white clouds. From the driveway, I looked back once. Through the window, I saw the warm light of the dining room, the silhouettes of my family still laughing, still celebrating. My chair was empty. No one had noticed. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I walked down the long drive toward the gate. I didn't cry. I didn't look back again. That was the night I stopped trying to belong to them. That was the night I decided to belong to myself. The morning after Christmas felt like waking up inside a silence that had weight, the kind that presses on your ribs and fills your ears until every thought sounds too loud. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the same suitcase I had packed hours earlier. A few clothes, my sketchbook, a folder with my degree, and the envelope that once held my grandmother's inheritance papers. It was empty now, and so was the part of me that kept believing family meant protection. The small apartment I had found a week earlier smelled faintly of old wood and detergent. I had rented it before Christmas, a safety plan I never thought I would use. The window looked out on a cracked parking lot where the snow had turned gray overnight. The radiator hissed and coughed like it resented its own job. I zipped the suitcase, locked the door behind me, and stepped into the morning. The sky was a dull silver clouds pressing low. Christmas decorations still clung to light poles, drooping from the weight of ice. I walked down Birch Street toward the diner I had passed every day on my way to job interviews that went nowhere. Its red neon sign blinked on and off, letters half-lit but still promising warmth. A hand-painted sign taped to the door read hiring part-time. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of coffee bacon grease and maple syrup. The place buzzed with chatter and clinking dishes, a rhythm that somehow felt alive. Behind the counter stood a woman with her hair tied up by a pencil and a towel slung over her shoulder. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "You looking for work or warmth?" I hesitated, both, I think. She gave a short laugh that sounded like gravel and sunlight. Then start by pouring me a cup of coffee. Her name was Bunny, though she didn't look much like one. Her arms were strong, her voice sharp, and her kindness subtle but real. By the end of that first morning, I had wiped 10 tables, broken one plate, and earned $15 in tips. When I untied my borrowed apron, Bunny leaned against the counter, chewing on a toothpick. "You move like someone who's got too much on her mind," she said. I told her I just needed quiet. She smiled. "It's quite easy. Peace takes work. You want both come back tomorrow." And I did. For the first few weeks, I learned the language of motion. Pour, wipe, smile, repeat. I learned that the smell of frying oil means you still have a job, and the jingle of the front doorbell can sound like possibility. The regulars began to recognize me. A retired bus driver named Hank always tipped $1 and told the same joke about losing his keys. A pair of teachers came every Thursday to grade papers over pancakes. They treated me like part of the background, which was fine. Being invisible felt easier when it paid by the hour. At night, I went home to my tiny studio above a barber shop. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the buzz of clippers during the day and the hum of traffic at night. The rent was $350 a month, paid in cash to an old man who never asked questions. My one luxury was a second-hand space heater that whined like an old dog but kept me warm. I spent evenings at the small table by the window, sketching while the city lights flickered on. I drew everything I could see, the chipped mug on the table, the view of the alley, even the folds of my apron. I filled page after page with things no one would ever care about, but it made me feel like my hands still remembered purpose. One night, I sat there staring at my phone. It hadn't buzzed once in a month. No text from Mom, no voicemail from Dad, not even a meme from Lena. The screen stared back at me like a blank page. I said out loud, "You really didn't notice, did you?" My voice sounded strange in the empty room. Then I turned the phone face down and drew the outline of a door opening into light. By spring, the diner felt like the only world that made sense. Bunny started calling me kid and taught me tricks no design class ever could. She said the trick to surviving people is knowing when to nod and when to walk away. One afternoon, she slid me a plate of fries and said, "Some people think life's about getting applause. It's not. It's about showing up when no one claps." I didn't answer, but the words stuck like seeds in dry soil. A few weeks later, a new customer walked in, a woman who didn't belong there. She was older, maybe in her 60s, wearing gloves and pearls that looked out of place under the fluorescent light. She sat by the window, ordered tea with lemon, and studied the room like she was reading a book only she could understand. When I brought her tea, she looked up and said, "You're new." I nodded. She smiled just slightly. "You have a steady hand. Most people your age shake when they pour." I said I've had practice. She tilted her head. "You are an artist or something?" I hesitated. "Used to be." Something softened in her eyes. She pulled a small notebook from her bag and began sketching on a napkin. I didn't mean to stare, but her lines were confident and graceful, like someone who'd spent a lifetime noticing details. She turned the napkin slightly toward me. It was a house. A grand old mansion, tired but dignified, its columns cracked and ivy climbing the walls. "It's my home," she said. "Prospect Hill. Been in the family for a century. But time's not kind to wood or people." I asked if she was an architect. She smiled. "No, just a woman trying to preserve what still has a soul." Her words sat with me long after she left. When I went to clear the table, I saw she had left the napkin beneath her teacup. The sketch was smudged where the cup had rested, and beneath it, written neatly in blue ink, was a name and number. Eleanor Whitmore. That night, I spread the napkin on my table beside my sketchbook. The paper was thin and fragile, the ink slightly blurred from the heat of the tea, but the drawing felt alive. I traced the outline of the roof with my fingertip. Something in me stirred a curiosity I hadn't felt in years. Outside, sirens echoed faintly through the city, and snow flurries drifted past the window, even though spring had already been declared on the calendar. I looked at my phone one more time, still no messages. Then I turned it off completely, set the napkin under my pillow, and fell asleep to the sound of the radiator ticking. In my dream, I was walking up a hill toward a house with tall windows and a door that had been waiting a long time to be opened. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was that napkin lying on the floor beside my bed. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and thought, maybe it's time to see what waits behind that door. Eleanor did not call ahead. She rang the diner payphone just after sunrise and told Bunny to send me back. When I stepped into the alley with my apron still on, a dark sedan idled by the dumpster exhaust, curling like breath in cold air. The rear window slid down, and Eleanor's gloved hand motioned once. "Get in," she said in that steady way that is not a request. I climbed inside with coffee on my sleeves and a knot in my throat I did not recognize as hope. We drove uphill toward Prospect like the city was slowly lifting its chin. Frost glazed the lawns and the sidewalks cracked in careful lines. Eleanor did not fill the silence. She studied my hands as if steadiness could be read like palm lines. At the crest, she turned through iron gates that needed oil and patience. The house rose up all at once. Tall windows with tired eyes. A porch that sagged like a story told too many times. White columns streaked with gray. It was grand and it was wounded, and I felt my chest answer to both truths. Inside winter lived in the hall. The air carried lemon oil and dust, and the kind of quiet that old wood keeps for itself. Sun pushed through the front windows in a pale sheet, catching motes that hung like soft rain. Eleanor watched my face instead of the room. She said people either pity a house like this, or they bow to it. I stood there with my hands cold, and my heartbeat too loud, and said softly that I wanted to listen to it first. She nodded as if that were the right password. She led me to a bay window that had surrendered to gravity. The sash leaned out a hair enough to invite a draft. Paint had cracked in fine maps. The sill held faint carved initials. CW, and a year I had to squint to see. My fingers traced the dip where a hand had rested for years, maybe while someone awaited for news or watched children cross a lawn. I heard my dad say in my head that time is money. I heard my own voice say that sometimes time has meaning. I did not say either thing out loud. In the library, the wainscot had pulled from the wall a finger width, as if the room had taken a long breath and forgotten to let it out. Books were stacked sideways and in towers. Eleanor moved between them like a person who knew how to step without waking. Old grief. She asked for my plan, not a guess. I said, start where water comes in because water always writes its name on ceilings. Then stabilize what people touch most. Then the details that make a place feel honest. She watched my mouth as if truth could be measured in vowels. A doorbell rang somewhere deep in the house. Eleanor tilted her head. That will be him. Try not to let him sell you your own spine. She left and returned with a man in a new coat and a smile that practiced generosity in the mirror. He shook my hand and called me a young lady like a compliment with a leash. He said he restored historic homes. He said he could do the whole front level for a flat $10,000. He said he loved working for ladies who appreciate a deal. I felt old heat climb my neck the way it used to when my dad introduced me as a hobby. I kept my voice even. I asked him how he planned to address the separation at the wainscot. He said caulk and a clever paint line. I asked about the bay window. He said a screw through the sash and a fresh coat, and no one would know. Eleanor watched quietly from the doorway. I said those answers will survive one winter at most. The man's smile narrowed. He said he could do cash if that helped me. I said thank you and turned to Eleanor and said, I cannot recommend him. The man lifted his hands, then shrugged. He left a card on the mantel and backed out like the house had told him to. Eleanor did not speak until the front door clicked. Then she said some men bring a measuring tape for wood and a different one for women. She asked me how I price my own work. I told her I would write a scope list, unknowns without shame, and refused to promise speed where patience makes strength. She nodded once. The knot in my throat loosened a little. We walked a slow circle through the ground floor. In the dining room, an oval table sat with 2 chairs, as if parties had ended years ago and 2 people kept having dinner anyway. In the back hall, a mirror with a blackened edge held a thin reflection of my face. I looked older and calmer and somehow more myself. Eleanor caught the glance. She said a good house will tell you who you are if you are willing to hear it. Then she stopped like a thought had bumped into a memory. She asked for my last name again, as if she were testing how it felt in her mouth. Quinn. The word sat between us like a coin on a table. Her eyes moved, not her head. I braced for the crash of recognition. She only said I knew a man by that name once. Then she changed the subject the way people do when the past still has teeth. We ended in the kitchen where a kettle whistled. She poured tea into thick mugs that looked older than both of us. She asked about my family with the caution of someone placing their hand near a fence that might be electric. I said my dad liked rooms where he could hear his own voice, and my mom liked rooms where she could pretend not to. My sister liked rooms with cameras. I did not say the word inheritance. I did not say pond. Eleanor listened the way Bunny listens attention without pity. She set her mug down and said, I have a lawyer who understands old houses and older mistakes. I did not know yet why she said that. It landed and stayed. She opened a drawer and took out a bundle of keys tied with faded blue ribbon. She set them on the counter between us like a test. Some were brass and heavy. One had teeth that looked hand-cut. She said I give these only to people who understand that ownership and stewardship are not the same word. Would you like to try that window this morning? The keys clicked when I picked them up, and something in me clicked with them. While she made a call, I walked back to the bay and knelt on the rug. Cold leaked through the trim, and the faint sound of a passing truck came in, thin as thread. I set my fingers at the joints and felt where the wood had forgotten its job. I used my scarf as a temporary draft stop and wrote measurements on a receipt from my back pocket. When I looked up, Eleanor was watching from the doorway again, a file folder tucked under her arm like a shield. She said, "You carry a scarf like a tool." I said, "Sometimes all you have is what is in your hands." She smiled with her eyes, not her mouth. The front bell chimed again. This time, an older man in a navy cap arrived with a long wooden crate. He was from the glass shop on State Street. He set the crate on the floor and nodded at me like a colleague. "Old wave glass," he said. "Eleanor's order from last fall." He tipped his cap and left the bill clipped to the crate. Eleanor lifted one end, and I took the other. The weight felt right. It promised trouble and reward in equal measure. In the library, she set the crate down and then set the file on the table. She said, "I need to be honest with you." She opened the folder and slid a single page toward me. A faded clipping from a business journal. A photo of my dad standing with 3 men at a ribbon cutting, all teeth and handshakes. The caption named the Quinn firm and an investment group that included the name Whitmore. My breath thinned. Eleanor watched me without blinking. She said, "I invested with your dad a long time ago. He was charming and impatient, and he won a great many dinners with reels of promises. When the market turned, he let go of the people who had believed him first. My husband is among them." The room went quiet in the way that increased sound. I could hear my pulse and the soft complaint of the old floor and the way the house seemed to lean closer. I said, "I did not know any of this." She nodded. "I can see that." She tapped the glass crate with one finger. "We can still fix what is here. What is behind us may never be repaired." I said softly, "Thank you for the truth." She said, "Do you still want the job?" I said more now than an hour ago. We ate toast with marmalade at the kitchen table like a truce. Then Eleanor drove me to the diner so I could clock out properly. Bunny looked at the keys in my palm and raised one eyebrow high. She wiped the counter with slow circles and said, "Do not let rich history talk to you like cheap charm." Then she hugged me so quickly I almost missed it and handed me a thermos of soup for later. Back at the house, I opened the crate and ran my hand along the edge of the glass. It rippled softly, a visible memory of being made by fire, not machines. I set it under the bay light to catch the pale sun and marked the pane sizes on paper. While I worked, my phone buzzed once in my pocket. I ignored it. Then again. Then a third time with the persistent tremor of a number that thought it owned me. I pulled the phone out and looked. Dad Mobile. No message. Just the insistence of his name against the glass. I powered the phone down and set it face down on the mantel like a boundary, made visible. I could feel Eleanor's gaze from the doorway again, that quiet way she had of checking the temperature without touching the pot. She did not ask who had called. She said only that interruptions are a kind of pressure test. Houses show their strengths when you are not looking at them. So do people. By late afternoon, I had a temporary plan for the bay, a shopping list that included putty and points and patience, and a schedule that would take real weeks, not pretend ones. I wrote the numbers in ink because I wanted to mean it. Eleanor stood beside me at the window and followed my finger as I traced the sequence. She said yes at each step in a tone that held approval and something like relief. Then she said a sentence that felt like a door opening. "You will run this project. I will sign and pay and stay out of your way unless you need authority. We will respect the work more than our egos. If you can live with that, we should put it on paper." We sat at the dining table with a heavy pen and a clean contract. She wrote my name in firm letters. I wrote mine with a hand that did not shake. The ink dried while the winter light slid off the floor. She handed me one copy and kept one for herself. She said, "Welcome to the house." It sounded like welcome to yourself. On my way out, I paused in the hall by the black-edged mirror. My face looked different, not prettier or older, just placed. I slipped the keys into my coat pocket and felt their weight press a promise into my palm. Through the open door, I could see the bay window catching the last thin light. It looked almost proud. Outside, the air was a bit clean, and the iron gate complained less when I pushed it. The city down below had that blue-hour stillness that makes every car sound like a story starting. I reached the sidewalk and my phone woke itself up with a chime as it searched for a signal. A message bloomed on the screen without my permission. From Dad. "We need to talk today. Come by the house or call me now." It felt like an old command dressed as urgency. Another message arrived almost on top of it from Lena. "Dad says you should answer. It is important. Use your head for once." I stood under a bare tree and let the cold put color in my hands. The part of me that used to jump when my dad snapped his fingers twitched like a trickney in rain. Then the newer part of me stepped forward. The part that had earned toast and keys and ink. I typed slowly, "I am working. If there is to be a conversation, it will be on my terms and in a public place. I will send a time." I did not wait for a reply. I put the phone away and started downhill, the keys warm in my pocket from the heat of my hand. The city smelled like wood smoke and snow. Behind me in a house that remembered how to be beautiful, light rested on old glass and held. Ahead of me was a small studio, a thermos of soup, and the first version of a plan for my own life that felt like it could last longer than one winter. At the corner, I stopped and looked back once. The house stood in a pool of late light, like a person who has decided to stop, apologizing. I knew then that whatever my dad wanted would have to wait in the cold, just like anyone else who shows up without knocking. I turned and kept walking, breath-steady steps, sure, ready to put the next day on paper in ink. The call came in while I was standing on a ladder pressing new glazing points into the bay window. My phone rattled on the sill with that long, insistent buzz that means a person will not be ignored. Dad Mobile flashed across the glass like a ghost spelling its own name. I let it go once, twice, 3 times, then picked it up because silence only works when you choose it. My dad said we need to talk today. His voice dressed like urgency and ownership, and he said the company had hit a rough patch, and then he corrected himself and said a severe contraction, and then he shifted to what he really wanted. "We will need a place for a while. Your place will do." Words can tilt a room even when you are on solid wood. The sash in my hands felt heavier. Cold air threaded past my cheek, and I could hear my own pulse in my ear like a metronome that had lost patience. I said slowly that any conversation happens in public and on my clock. He tried the old tone, the one that had frozen me at 15. Then he pivoted into a softer performance. "Be reasonable. The family stays together." I said I am reasonable now, and ended the call as if I were setting down a tool I no longer used. Eleanor appeared below the ladder without a sound, one hand on the rail like she was holding the house steady. She did not ask who it was. She only said one line. "There is a difference between a doorbell and a battering ram." I nodded and climbed down palms white with putty dust and told her I needed 10 minutes to clear my head or I would start repairing the past instead of the window. In the kitchen, she poured tea and pushed a legal pad across the table. "Write the rules like a scope. If a person will not honor the paper, they will not honor the talk." I wrote 3 lines in block letters. Public place, 30 minutes. No requests for keys or addresses. I added one more and underlined it twice. No rewriting history. Eleanor tapped the pad with a fingertip and said that it looks like weatherproofing. My phone vibrated again. A text from Mom slid onto the screen with careful punctuation. "Your dad is under a lot of stress. We should speak as a family." I stared at the words as if they contained a trap door. I typed back a single sentence. "Saturday at 10 in the morning at Union Station Cafe for 30 minutes. She replied with a heart I did not feel. A minute later, Lena wrote, "Use your head for once and make this easy." I put the phone face down and listened to the kettle settle. The roofer called from the ridge to say the chimney flashing had separated in 3 places like tired lips and that he could patch before the weather turned. I said thank you and meant it. Work is a kind of mercy when your insides are loud. I went back to the bay, set the fresh points with a careful press, and felt the glass finally hold the way. Truth holds when you stop pushing it away. By noon, I was in the attic, tracing the stain from the slow leak, headlamp warm on my forehead, dust in the air like old snow. Eleanor climbed halfway up the steps and passed me a sandwich wrapped in paper. She said, "Eat before the world makes you forget." I chewed and stared at the joist where water had taught the wood a hard lesson, then wrote a note for myself. Gravity is honest, so is silence. After lunch, I walked to the hardware store on State Street for lime putty and sash cord. The bell over the door clanged like a rule. A man in a navy vest tried to sell me a miracle cock that promised forever in a day. I shook my head. Forever is a slow word. Outside, a gust of wind carried the kind of cold that tightens your jaw. I turned up my collar and almost missed the woman on the sidewalk who lifted a phone for a photo of me carrying glass. She wore a press badge on a lanyard. The badge said local business news in small letters. She smiled like she knew a secret and asked if I was the restorer working at Whitmore House. I said I work for Eleanor and kept walking. The last thing I needed was my name printed near hers while my dad was sharpening the knives of his narrative. Back at the house, I found Eleanor in the library with two guests who smelled like cologne and old money. They spoke in careful, low voices about the Quinn firm as if it were a weather pattern that ruined carefully planned weekends. One said a lender had pulled a line of credit, and another used the phrase, liquidity event like a tragic opera. When they noticed me, they went quiet in that way people do. When the person who cleans the room steps through a door. Eleanor cut the silence with a tone so even it felt like a rule. Clara is running the restoration. If you have dust complaints, speak now or never. The men smiled tight and left with their coats folded over their arms. Eleanor waited until the front door clicked and said that is how rich people, Ezekiel, pronounce the word collapse. My phone buzzed with a number I did not know. The voicemail landed before I could think twice. A man who said he was with a supplier left a message that the Quinn account would be frozen by Monday at 9 in the morning unless a payment cleared. He sounded like a person who had delivered this sentence many times. I sat on the stairs where the wood had been worn smooth by other people's lives and felt a small, steady heat that was not rage. It was recognition. The thing that had been unspoken was finally using its real name. Evening pressed in early. I mixed a small batch of putty for hairline fills at the corners of the bay and smoothed it with the lightest touch. The room exhaled. That is the only word for how it felt when material met patience. Eleanor stood at my shoulder and watched like a conductor keeping time. She asked quietly if I wanted her lawyer at the cafe on Saturday. I said I wanted my own voice first. She nodded and said, "Then I will be on a bench across the room reading a paper that I do not care about." On the walk to the diner for my night shift, the sky looked like slate and the streetlights came on one by one like a metronome finding a beat. Bunny set a mug in front of me before I had my apron tied and said, "You look like a person who just swallowed a battery." I told her there was a meeting on Saturday. She said, "Set chairs where you want them and keep your back to a wall." She said, "Put the clock on the table." She slid over a salt shaker and a pepper shaker and a napkin, then arranged them like a tiny map. Door here, you are here, then there. Air belongs to you, keep it clear. I took a photo because sometimes a picture steadies the hand better than any speech. The dinner rush kept me moving. Motion tames nerves, heavy plates. Hot coffee, the noise of people with ordinary problems. A man argued softly with his wife about thermostat settings. A college kid begged for a shift trade on the phone. Somewhere between refills, my phone hummed again. A text from someone I had not seen in years. A cousin who always knew where the gossip lived. The message said the business page is about to run a piece on Quinn debt and that a reporter was sniffing around for a human angle. He ended with telling your dad to answer his own calls for once. After close, I walked back to the studio with a paper bag that held soup and cornbread. I set my phone on this dresser and wrote Saturday on a note card in thick letters. Under it, I wrote 3 questions in ink. What do you want? What do you think I owe you? What are you offering that is? Not a guilt story. I stared at the 3rd line until the words stopped swimming. Then I wrote a 4th. When did you remember I existed? The room went very still. Outside, a bus sighed at the corner and moved on. I slept in pieces. Every time I drifted off, I saw my dad's face at the head of that old Christmas table. Laughter shaped like a lesson, and I felt the same old smallness rise and fall. Each time I sat up and breathed like I do when a sash resists. Slow in, slow out. Wood yields to steady hands. So do the parts of yourself that were trained to flinch. Morning broke thin and bright. I reached Whitmore House just as the roofer packed up. He said the chimney was now tight and right, and that a hard rain would tell the true story. I thanked him and watched the empty sky as if I could test into being. Inside, I checked the bay. The putty was firming the points held, and the draft had softened to a polite whisper. I ran my fingertips along the rail and felt the faint warmth of the sun. It felt like a wind measured in inches, which is how most real winds arrive. At 11, I took the bus downtown to rehearse at the cafe. The room smelled like espresso and new paint. I sat at a small table by a window with a clear view of the door and placed my phone face down beside the napkin map from Bunny. A couple argued quietly at the counter about a holiday trip that now looked expensive. A woman in a dark suit scrolled the news and frowned. I watched people come and go until my nervous system stopped thinking every man in a blue coat was my dad. On the ride back, my phone buzzed with one more message from Mom. She wrote, "We will be on time. Your dad is under pressure. Please be kind." I typed back that kindness is a boundary. Then I put the phone away and watched the city slide by. Storefronts. A man walking a dog with a blue bandana. A child dragging a sled across bare grass because winter had not learned its part. I reached the house and climbed to the library where Eleanor had set out 2 paint samples on a board. Quiet green and a warmer shade she called evening pear. We stood in the window light and tilted the board left and right, watching the colors shift. She asked which one told the truth in the morning and at dusk. I pointed to the quiet green. It breathed without showing off. She said then, that is the one. Choose the thing that will still respect you when the party ends. Late afternoon, I sharpened my pencil and wrote the sequence for Saturday once more on a card. I could hide in my palm. Greet, sit, state boundaries, ask questions. Do not feel silence, end on time. The house seemed to approve, or maybe that was only my own spine learning how to stand without instructions. I cleaned my tools until the metal shone and lined them up in a row like a small army. Dusk put blue on the walls. I locked up, slid the keys into my coat pocket, and headed down the hill. My phone buzzed once more with a final text from Dad. We expect this to be productive. Bring your spare keys. The old heat touched the back of my neck and then disappeared, like a reflex realizing it was no longer needed. I typed 6 words and felt everyone land where it should. This meeting is for talking only. The street was quiet. My breath came steady. Somewhere behind me, a house held its light glass set true, wood deciding to keep faith with itself. Tomorrow would bring the cafe and the clock and the old voice trying the old tricks. Tonight, I had soup and a list and the kind of sleep that comes when you choose your own weather. Mom showed up at Whitmore House without calling, a pale blue gift bag hanging from her wrist like proof she had remembered something. The bell echoed through the hall the way sound does in old places, finding corners you forgot existed. Eleanor paused at the library doorway, eyes narrowing the way a person does when weather changes. She asked with a small tilt of her head if I wanted her to stay nearby. I nodded once. Then I walked to the entry, hands still dusted with lime, heart steady and fast at the same time. Mom stood on the marble with her coat unbuttoned and her hair done the way she always wore it for church. She looked past me first, traveling the moldings with her eyes as if the house might give her a script. Then she looked at me and tried a smile that didn't quite land. She said I brought lemon bread, you always liked it, and lifted the bag like a white flag. I stepped aside and let her in because dignity is a habit, not a mood. The hall smelled like lemon oil and cold air. She reached to brush dust from my sleeve, and I took half a step back on instinct. She pretended not to notice. She said your dad is under a lot of pressure, honey, and your sister is stretched thin, and it would help if we could all calm down. I heard my own voice answer that there would be lunch at the kitchen table in 10 minutes and conversation after 30 minutes only. She blinked like I had switched a light on too bright. Then she followed me toward the back heels, soft on the old runner. Eleanor had set out 3 mugs and a plate for the lemon bread that I recognized from the bag. She greeted my mom with the cool kindness of a woman who has learned to keep her spine while still offering tea. Mom looked smaller across from her, one hand clasping the other, eyes scanning the room like there might be a trap. I poured tea and felt the cup warm my fingers. Mom started with memories, the kind wrapped in ribbon. You loved to sketch houses at the kitchen table. Your sister would dance through the room, and you would not even look up. The smile hovered again. I said I still draw at tables. She nodded and tried to laugh, but it broke in the middle. Eleanor let silence do its own work. After a minute, Mom reached into her purse and slid a magazine across to me. The cover showed a restored townhouse and an article title in soft serif. Inside, a small photo of me with my head turned toward a window sat above a paragraph that called me a rising specialist in historic residential preservation. My stomach hit the floor, then lifted. I had spoken to a writer briefly about the process, but I had not expected to be printed this soon. Mom tapped the page with one finger. Your dad saw this at the club at lunch and told everyone you were consulting for the family portfolio, she said. He told them we were always supportive of your... She trailed off. That old pause where design turned into a smaller word. My throat closed the way it used to when he called my work decorating. I looked at the photo for a long breath and then closed the magazine. I said my work is not the family's portfolio. It is mine. Mom's face shifted like a curtain caught by a draft. She said carefully that your name helps the family right now, and people will talk less if you let your dad mention you. Eleanor's spoon clicked against porcelain once, a small bell of disapproval. I said no. The word was round and quiet and absolute. Mom pressed her lips together and nodded, the way you nod when a door does not open for you. We ate small squares of lemon bread in a row like truce offerings. Mom set her napkin down and folded it into a precise rectangle the way she does when she is about to say something that hurts. She said you should know your dad has made sacrifices for Lena and for all of us, and sometimes choices have to be made. My hands still. Eleanor's eyes did not move from my mother's face. Mom swallowed, then said a sentence like a stone dropped in a well. He used your grandmother's jewelry last summer, the pieces she wanted you to have. He said it was temporary. He said he would buy them back once the deal cleared. The words kept falling. He needed to help Mark, and it was only a bridge. She blinked hard and stared at her folded napkin like it might have new instructions. The air left my body without sound. I did not feel anger in a sharp way. It came like cold doze, starting at the edges, then taking the room. I pictured the jewelry box I had held as a girl, the velvet indentations where rings lived the necklace I touched on holidays. I heard my dad telling a friend at Christmas that he had already borrowed against my inheritance. Now the shape of it stood in front of me with a name. Pawned, gone. Used to prop a man who already had a lifeline. Eleanor set her cup down and reached for the legal pad we had used for rules the day before. She said we will need the pawn ticket, or at least the shop name. Mom shook her head in a quick motion like she had been slapped by the calendar. I do not have it. I did not ask for it. He told me it was handled. Her voice lost its script. She looked straight at me for the first time, and the room filled with all the years she had chosen not to see me. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to demand a straight line from silence to this table. Instead, I said quietly that what you ignore becomes what you believe. She closed her eyes and winced as if it were a medical truth. Mom reached for the gift bag again and pulled out a plastic container of more. Lehman bread like sugar might rewrite a ledger. She said we should come together now. Clara, there is a lot at stake. Your dad needs to show stability, and if you could make a statement about family. I let a small laugh into the room, the kind that carries sorrow more than humor. I said my statement is work that holds, not a press quote. She nodded too fast. Then her voice turned small. People at church ask about you. I tell them you are busy. Her hands were empty on the table. I did not rescue them. Eleanor excused herself and returned with a manila envelope already addressed, a notary stamp waiting beside it like a small future. She said I am going to suggest a next step and you may choose to hate me, but it will hold in court. She outlined a letter demanding the return of specific assets or equivalent cash value within 30 days, with a list attached that named the pieces my grandmother had documented inside her estate papers. Mom opened her mouth, closed it, then said you would say it was for the family. Eleanor answered that courtrooms prefer paper to intention. The kitchen clock tapped its way toward the end of our 30 minutes. Mom looked at the clock as if it might give her back time spent looking the other way. She stood slowly. Her face looked older than last Christmas, older than it had any right to look in spring light. She reached for my hand, and I did not move mine. She let her arm fall and said I should have said something sooner. I said you should have said something at all. She nodded like a student corrected at the board. Then she asked in a whisper if she could come by my apartment next week. I said meet at the cafe Wednesday at 2. She nodded again as if the time itself could absolve. At the door, she touched the molding and said, "This house reminds me of my mother's kitchen. The paint cracked from heat, and the way light lays itself down like a tablecloth in the afternoon." She looked up at the transom window and squared her shoulders. She said your dad will be angry about that letter. I said he can send his anger to my lawyer. The word lawyer hung in the hall like something expensive. She put on her coat with careful movements, then stepped onto the marble and paused. Without turning, she said he wanted sons. He thought daughters should be easy. I let out a breath I did not know I had held for years. Then I shut the door gently so the latch would not complain. The house absorbed the quiet like an organ taking air. Eleanor waited in the library doorway, pen in hand, eyes calm and sharp at once. She asked if I needed a moment. I said I needed the pawn shop's name and a list of my grandmother's pieces from the estate file. Eleanor went to the study, opened a drawer, and returned with a thin folder she had copied the night I signed the contract. She said I took the liberty after you mentioned your grandmother. It includes an old appraisal and photographs taken before the funeral service. I took the folder and felt my gratitude like heat in my palms. My phone buzzed on this hall table. Lena's name lit the screen with an energy that felt like static. The text read, "Dad's friends loved the magazine piece. Proud of you for finally growing up. He will mention you tonight at dinner. Be smart." I laughed once without sound and set the phone face down. Eleanor said the word parade in her dry way. I said he can march without my feet. In the afternoon, I pulled out the glass crate and set a first pane into the refit sash. My hands moved with that steady rhythm that clears a mind better than prayer. Every press of the point felt like a small oath. Hold. Hold anyway. Hold even if the person who should have held you did not. By late day, the bay caught the light and threw it back in a way that softened the library and made the dust look like confetti. Work can be a kind of forgiveness when your heart is not ready to offer any. Near dusk, a message from an unknown number arrived with a photo attached. The camera had caught my dad at a long table at the club, glass raised, and a wide smile. The caption from a local business account read, "Quinn Legacy Stronger Together," with a tag using my name. My chest went cold and then calm. I typed a reply under the post without any anger in it. Correction. I do not consult for Quinn assets. I operate an independent preservation practice. Please amend. Then I put the phone on the mantel again, like a small object that could learn manners. I walked back to the kitchen where Eleanor had set out 2 bowls of soup and slices of toasted bread. We ate standing, leaning against the counter like old friends at the end of a long day. She said you did not raise your voice. I said I am saving it for work that requires it. She nodded. That is the better kind of volume. We cleaned up in the soft light. The house felt different, like a person after an honest conversation. I made a list for the morning. Call 3 pawn shops within 5 miles of the club. Ask for records from last summer. Cross-check with the appraisal photos. Then draft the demand letter and attach the list. Eleanor underlined the word attach and handed me a stamp. She said the mail goes out at 8:45 in the morning. I said I will be here at 8:30. When I finally locked the front door, night had gathered in the trees. I stood on the step and breathed in the cold until my lungs felt rinsed. My mother's lemon bread sat in the kitchen, wrapped and labeled in her careful hand. I left it there. There are some gifts you do not accept right away. The keys in my pocket felt like friendly weight. I started down the path with a pace that felt owned. Tomorrow would be about paper and proof, and a line in ink that said, "The girl at the Christmas table had learned to pull her chair back and build a new room." I found the ledger by accident because paper tells people when metal will not. Morning light was just sliding across the library floor at Whitmore House when I opened the thin folder Eleanor had copied from my grandmother's estate file. Tucked behind the appraisal photos was a receipt half hidden under a paperclip. The header listed a bank I knew from childhood, the one with marble floors and a vault door that looked like a movie set. The line items marched in faded ink: trust account withdrawal, transfer to Quinn Development Holding, signature on file. My name appeared in neat cursive that was almost mine and not mine at all. For a minute, the room tilted. I steadied myself against the table and let air move in and out until the edges of things stopped shaking. I lifted the paper to the window and traced the loop of the R in Clara with my finger. My loop curls like a wave. This one had a flat top like a rooftop with ice on it. I had not signed this. Someone had borrowed my name to carry their weight. Eleanor came in with 2 mugs and set one by hand without asking what was wrong. I slid the ledger and the receipt toward her. She did not gasp, she read. Then she reached for a pen and wrote a date on the margin. She said softly that a forged signature will break a person faster than a winter roof. I asked how we prove what anyone can pretend. She set the pen down and said with paper and patience and a lawyer who understands both. We sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad between us like a workbench. I wrote a list: bank officer, statement copies, old signature cards, demand letter for the return of specific assets with photographs attached. Eleanor added one item: notary appointment this afternoon. She had already texted her attorney. The reply came back before the kettle stopped singing. Bring the ledger and yourself. At 10:30, we met Rachel Torres in a small office that smelled like file, boxes, and clean printer drums. She was the kind of woman who made a navy suit look like armor. She scanned the documents with a speed that felt like respect, not hurry. Then she asked me to sign my name on a blank sheet 5 times with my usual pen. She laid those signatures beside the receipt and nodded once like a carpenter who can hear a loose joist by tapping. She said, "This is forgery likely by someone who has seen your hand for years." She asked whether my mom had access to my files. I said yes. She asked whether my dad could pressure a banker. I said he could sell sand in a rainstorm. She smiled without warmth and said, "We will get the originals and the security, footage from the bank if any still exists." She drafted a request while we watched the cursor dance. By noon, I was walking into the bank of my childhood, marble cool under my shoes, a quiet that tried to tell me to behave. A man in a suit greeted me with the practiced friendliness of someone who has a policy manual in his head. I slid Rachel's letter across the counter and said I needed to review the signature card for my trust and copies of any transfers within the last 2 years. He asked if my dad would be joining us. I said no. He asked if I had an appointment. I said I had a lawyer. He glanced at the letter and adjusted his tone the way a person changes lanes when a truck appears in their mirror. He disappeared through a door and returned with a woman whose badge said, "Branch Manager." She led me to a glass room where the air felt new. We went through paper like a slow rain. Signature card from when I was 18, signed in a nervous hand with a loop that is mine and no one else's. Transfer slips from last summer and the fall before and the winter after that. My name on lines I did not sign. A teller stamp with a date that matched the week after my last birthday. The branch manager grew more careful each time she turned a page. She called upstairs to a compliance officer I could not see. She said quietly that there would be an internal review. I asked for certified copies. She said they would be ready by tomorrow at 10 in the morning. She lifted her eyes then, and her voice changed. She said, "I am sorry." It sounded like she had saved that word for people who really needed it. Outside, the street looked ordinary in a way that made my skin feel thin. Buses sighed at the corner. A woman pushed a stroller with a blanket tacked tight against the wind. I stood still for a long breath and let the ordinary do its steady job. Then I walked back toward Whitmore House with the ledger under my arm like a fragile thing that was finally telling the truth. Work steadied me. I set a fresh pane into the bay and listened to the honest sound of putty settling under a careful knife. The library exhaled, that small shift in temperature that means a draft has been turned into a boundary. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink until the water ran clear and called Rachel with what the bank had promised. She said she would prepare a notice for the Quinn board and for any lender listed against the company. She said exposure works faster when sunlight lands where fraud has slept. Near 3 in the afternoon, my phone lit with a message from a number used by the club. A charity committee was hosting a gala that evening. My dad would speak at 7:15 about legacy and community. The message included a photo of a seating chart with my name printed at table 9 as if I had agreed to applause. I stared at the pixels until my throat felt like glass. Then I sent Rachel the screenshot. She replied with a plan in 2 lines. Attend for 15 minutes. Deliver documents to the board president. Leave before your name becomes a shield for him. I dressed like a person who can do both truth and grace. Black dress that felt like a statement you do not need to decorate. Hair pulled back in a clean line. Eleanor watched from the doorway with a look I had only seen on her face when a room finally came together. She said, "You know where the exits are." I said I do. She handed me a white envelope with firm edges. Inside were the certified copies she had pulled from the estate file and a bow cover letter on Rachel's letterhead. Eleanor said, "Hand this to the person who handles the checkbook," and did not explain. Paper does that better than any speech. Union Station looked like a postcard under evening lights. The grand hall glowed, and servers carried trays that winked with glass. I felt the old heat at the base of my skull and let it pass through without owning it. Table 9 sat near the middle like a target. Lena's laugh floated above the murmur before I saw her. She wore red and success, and the same face she used when photographers had opinions. My dad stood at the front of the room, shaking hands with both palms, that gesture he uses when he wants to look generous. Mom stood to the side with a smile arranged like flowers in winter. I did not sit. I walked past my assigned chair and stopped near the dais, where the board president reviewed note cards. He was a tidy man with an honest crease in his brow from years of numbers. I said his name quietly, and he looked up with polite confusion. I placed the envelope in his hand and said, "This belongs with you before. Tonight becomes a story no one can clean up." He asked me to wait. I said no. He slid a finger under the flap anyway. His eyes moved over the first page and the second. When he reached the signature card, and the transfer slips with dates and teller stamps the color left his face in a careful way. He thanked me without volume. He stepped off the dais with the envelope held tight. He did not look at my dad when he passed him. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. The sound cracked and settled. The room turned its face toward the front. My dad straightened his jacket and reached for the lectern with the ease of a man who thinks rooms exist for his voice. Before he could begin, the board president raised a hand and spoke into the mic with a tone that made people sit up. He said there would be a brief delay and that internal matters required attention and that he was grateful for understanding. The words were clean and spare and surgical. People shift in their chairs like corn in a field when wind arrives from a new direction. Lena appeared at my elbow, fast and bright. She hissed a question about what I had done, whispered through teeth that looked painted on. I said I had returned the paper to the person who signed the checks. She called me reckless. I said I prefer the word accurate. She made a small sound and walked toward the front with a hurry that had panic in its shoes. I stepped back to the edge of the room and watched the thing happen that you always think will be loud and turns out to be quiet. 3 men in suits spoke to my dad near the side door with their bodies angled, like a fence. He kept his smile and his hands out and his shoulders broad. One of the men held up the envelope. My dad looked at the pages. He looked at me. His face performed a mixture of shock and disappointment, like he had rehearsed it in the car. Then the performance slipped. He saw that the paper had its own voice. I left before the speeches began. Outside, the air felt new. The clock over the hall read 7:20 in the evening. My feet landed on the stone with that soft slap that means you are moving away from something that once owned you. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel said the board has paused the speech and called a special session for the morning at 8. She wrote that I had done exactly enough. On the bus, a child pressed his nose to the window and drew a smiley face in the fog. His mother handed him a napkin and laughed. The ordinary world is a kind of raft. I let it carry me for a few stops. When I reached my block, the barbershop light was still on. The barber waved once through the glass. It looked like a blessing disguised as habit. Back at Whitmore House, the library was dark and kind. I set my shoes by the door and stood in the bay window for a minute. The new panes held the streetlights in long, soft lines. I could feel the house holding its shape the way a body does after a long breath. Eleanor was in the kitchen with the radio low. She looked up and asked with her eyes. I said the board took the envelope. She nodded and poured tea. We stood there with steam between us and the kind of quiet that does not require bravery. I wrote a short list for the morning. Bank at 10 for certified copies. Rachel's office after. Draft demand to the pawn shop with photographs attached. Call the journalist only if necessary, because truth deserves timing more than noise. I slid the list under my keys and turned off the light. The hall smelled like lemon and wood warmed by work. I climbed the stairs and felt a steadiness that did not belong to victory. It belonged to alignment. In-bed sleep came in pieces and then all at once. Before I drifted under, I thought about the loop of my R and how small a thing can prove a life. In the morning, there would be more paper and rooms with marble and voices that try to bend facts into favors. Tonight, there was a house that had learned to keep out the cold, and a woman who had remembered that doors can be opened from the inside. The board called the special session for 8 in the morning, and the building smelled like new carpet and hard coffee. Rachel walked beside me with that steady pace lawyers have when the outcome is not a promise, but preparation. We were stopped at the glass doors by a man in a navy blazer who said the meeting was closed. Rachel slid her card across the counter and said we would wait in the lobby. The receptionist nodded like a person who knew a storm when she felt the pressure drop. Through the glass, I could see my dad arrive with 2 men I did not recognize. His shoulders rolled back as if posture could buy time. The board president met them at the threshold with the white envelope in his hand, and the room went quiet in that careful way that means words will be measured. I could not hear the voices. I watched the bodies. The board president stood square. My dad used both palms like a preacher selling calm. One of his men paced a short line on the rug and stared at his shoes. Rachel leaned in and said, "Watch who keeps their hands open and who hides them." I kept my eyes on my dad's fingers. They tapped the table when he thought no one saw. At 8:40, the door opened, and the board president stepped into the lobby as if oxygen lived here. He asked for me by name. His voice was polite, but it carried a weight I had not heard last night. He said the documents were alarming, and the compliance team would be working with counsel. He handed Rachel a written acknowledgement of receipt that used words like chain of custody and internal audit. He looked at me and said that the bank footage would help everyone see clearly. I nodded and said the copies would be ready at 10 in the morning. He pressed his lips together, thanked us, and went back inside. My phone buzzed with a message from Mom. It said your dad is doing his best, and people can be cruel. Please do not make this worse. Another message followed from Lena that read, "You have no idea how business works, and you are burning bridges we built for you." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I turned the phone face down and listened to the lobby clock count its soft seconds. When the doors opened again just after 9, my dad walked out with his jaw tight. He saw me, and that tired performance slid over his face, the one that mixed wounded pride with parental patience. He started toward me. Rachel stepped a half pace forward and said, "We will take written communications only." He changed angles like a car negotiating traffic and addressed me anyway. His tone carried the old iron. He said families handle these things inside. I said gently that forged signatures live outside. He smiled without his eyes and said we could fix this together if I made a statement acknowledging a misunderstanding. My hands stayed quiet at my sides. I said no. One syllable can be a whole building if you stand it on a foundation. He turned to leave, and a man I did not know broke from the elevator bay and caught my sleeve in a way that looked like urgency dressed as respect. He introduced himself as a supplier owed 3 months of invoices. He whispered that he had seen this before and that when clients start talking, legacy checks stop clearing. His eyes flicked to my dad and back to me. He said, "Do not let them hang this on you." His fingers trembled as if the cold had followed him inside. I thanked him and wrote his name on my palm with a dull pen. Sometimes an ally appears with no headline. At 10 in the morning, I sat across from the branch manager at the bank. She slid a packet over to Rachel with certified copies clipped to a cover letter that used the kind of paper that makes a sound when you set it down. She said the footage from last summer would take another day to retrieve from off-site storage. She added that the log showed an internal override on the day of the largest transfer and that it had been keyed by a senior officer. Her expression did not change. Her hand tightened on the folder when she said it. I recognized the shape of conscience when it pushes through training. Rachel thanked her and asked that the footage be preserved and that a formal hold be placed on the account. The manager nodded and said it was done. Outside wind cut down the side street with blades in it. I pulled my scarf up and headed toward Whitmore House with the packet under my coat like a warm animal. My phone rang with an unknown number, and I let it go to voicemail. A text arrived 5 seconds later. Mark wanted to meet. He said he had information that would help me understand the full picture. He said privacy would be best. I replied with a public place and a time. Noon at the cafe near the station. 30 minutes. He arrived already sweating under a designer coat, eyes moving in quick darts. He ordered a mineral water he did not drink. He said he had a thumb drive that contained internal emails between my dad and a banker and drafts of statements prepared in case I objected, and a list of my grandmother's items with prices beside them that made my skin go cold. He slid a small black drive across the table and set his palm on it like a game show host. He said he wanted two things. He wanted my silence for the next month, and he wanted me to tell the board that I believed my signature could have been an office error. He said if the company weathered this, he would make me whole. He said the jewelry would come back and the trust would be rebuilt. People talk about anger like it is heat, but this felt like a clean wind. I watched his mouth form words without listening to them for a few seconds. Then I asked him to repeat the part where I pretend my name belongs to whoever needs it. He swallowed and said this was bigger than feelings. He said investors scare easily, and the press loves a story about a fallen family. He said a niece of the board president worked at the paper and that the feature could tilt either way. He thought this was leverage. I saw a man trying to cover a crack with paint while the joist failed under his feet. I said I would take the drive and review it. I told him my answer would come through counsel. I let the words sink and then added that any attempt to claim I had agreed to anything would be answered in writing and in daylight. He reached for charm and missed. He said he had always liked me. He said I was sensible. I stood up and the chair legs made a sound like a line being drawn on a gym floor. I took the drive and left him with his untouched water. Rachel plugged the drive into a laptop on her conference table like a surgeon touching metal. The file slid open with a quiet snap. Email threads showed my dad pressing a banker for exceptions. Drafts of a press release framed me as grateful for family leadership and spoke about mentorship and legacy with words I could taste like chalk. A spreadsheet listed my grandmother's jewelry with appraisal numbers and a separate column labeled bridge price. I counted the entries twice. 12 pieces. The necklace with the small diamond drop sat at the bottom of the list like a period. The bridge price made me feel older by a decade. Rachel printed what mattered and slid the pages into a fresh envelope. She looked at me for a long breath. She asked if I wanted criminal charges. The word criminal filled the room like cold air. I said I wanted the truth on paper and my name back where it belonged. She nodded. She said civil first, criminal if they lied again. We sent the packet to the board president and to the bank's compliance officer. Rachel added a short cover that used words like aware and ongoing and duty. Then she sat back and let silence do what it does between clicks. She said the next move would likely be a threat dressed as an invitation. She was right within an hour. My phone lit with a message from Dad that read family dinner tonight to discuss a plan. The time was 7 in the evening. The address was the house where I grew up. A second message followed. Bring the documents so we can close this as a family. I stared at the phrase close this as a family until the letters felt like ants. Then I sent one line to Rachel. He wants me at the house. She replied in 7 words. Public only. Witness present. Written summary afterward. I breathed out and sent my answer to Dad. Cafe at Union Station at 6:30 minutes. I will bring nothing. He replied with one word. No, I left it there. The old reflex twitched, then went still. Back at Whitmore House, I carried the paintboard to the bay and held it against the light. Quiet green shifted like leaves in shade. I chose it again. Across the room, Eleanor stood with a folded newspaper. She had read the morning business page and the small piece about the gala delay. She said the reporter had called for a comment. I asked what she gave them. She said the truth in 7 words. The house is teaching us about patience. I laughed once and felt the knot in my chest loosen. Near 4 in the afternoon, the pawn shop on South River returned my call. A man with a tired voice said a necklace matching my description had been brought in last summer with other items. He said the ticket holder had been a man with a signature that matched the account. He would not give me the name on the phone. He said certified requests only. I told him the request was already in the mail. He said he would look for the footage, and that if the items had not been sold, the hold would keep them off the floor for 7 days. He sounded like a person who had seen too many sad stories to be surprised by one more. I walked the perimeter of the library and let my fingertips slide along the chair rail. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. The bay glass caught a reflection of my face that looked steadier than I felt. The house carried the sound of my steps like a soft drum. When I reached the doorway, Eleanor handed me a card with a name I did not know. A journalist who writes about white-collar crime had called her personal line after seeing the gala note. Eleanor said she had told him nothing. She said the man was patient and precise. I put the card in my pocket. Truth is a tool. You choose when to pick it up. Dusk moved in with that blue that makes everything honest. I locked the front door and paused on the stoop. A text from Mom arrived. She wrote that she would be at the cafe at 6 even if Dad would not. She said she wanted to talk without scripts. My chest tightened and then eased. I typed a simple yes. Then I put the phone away. On the bus, I watched the city do what it always does. A boy practiced dribbling with an invisible basketball in the aisle. A woman counted out exact change for a grocery list she had written in pencil. The ordinary kept holding the world together, while mine tilted and righted. I thought about the thumb drive in Rachel's office and the envelope in the board president's hands and the pawn ticket probably sitting in a drawer with dust on it. I thought about the word daughter and how some people use it like currency. I decided I would retire that currency for myself. Love would be a verb I watched, not a word I owed. At the studio, I turned on the lamp that makes the room feel like a small theater. I sharpened a pencil and wrote tomorrow's sequence on an index card. Meet Mom at 6. Listen for 5 minutes. Ask for the pawn shop name. Ask what she knew and when. Ask if she wants a life that does not require lies. Leave on time. I slid the card under my keys. Sleep would come late. I stood at the window and watched snow begin in a thin dust like the sky was erasing the chalkboard. In the morning, the bank would start pulling video. The pawn shop might fax a grainy copy. The board would take turns with their careful words. Tonight, I had a clean room, a steady breath, and a plan written in ink. The girl who walked out into the Christmas night without anyone noticing had learned to be seen by herself first. The next chapter would ask for more, and I felt ready to answer. Mom was already at the cafe when I walked in at 6, hands wrapped around a cup, like she needed heat to keep her voice from shattering. Snow clung to the window in a thin lace. I sat across from her and set my phone face down with the timer ready for 30 minutes. She noticed and nodded like a person who accepts new rules because the old ones broke. She began without the small talk that used to waste whole afternoons. Your dad is not coming. He wanted me to bring you home. He wants a private conversation. I said my conversations are public and my decisions are written. She swallowed and looked at the door as if he might still arrive. Then she leaned forward with a quick breath and said the pawn shop name like a confession. South River Jewelry and Loan on Archer. She said the owner remembered the necklace. She said he had called our house last month to chase a late fee, and your dad deleted the message and tossed the notice. She rubbed her forehead and whispered that she should have written it down. I asked when she found out about my signature. She blinked once hard. Last summer when the notary came to the house with a folder. Your dad said it was housekeeping. He placed your old birthday card next to the paper to copy the way you write. The loop. I felt the noise of the cafe fade around her words. I asked if she touched the folder. She said no, but she set out lemonade like it was a normal day, and it turned me into a person I barely recognize. Her mouth trembled, then steadied. I'm not going to ask you to forgive him. I'm going to ask you to keep yourself safe, because he is not done. The timer showed 22 minutes. I asked what not done meant. She pressed her nails into her palm and said your dad is trying to secure a bridge loan using my name and the house, and he told Lena he could move into your apartment for a while if the landlord agreed. And he told Mark there is a client with a mansion who could be part of the solution if you would be reasonable. She looked at me like she was seeing the room for the first time. I said Eleanor is not a solution, she is a person. We finished the last of our time with a silence that did not feel empty. I walked her to the door. She did an old habit and reached as if to fix a loose thread at my collar, then dropped her hand. She said, "I will answer if your lawyer calls." I said she will. She said, "I am sorry." The words landed and stayed humble and late. I watched her cross the street with careful steps and disappear into the blue of early night. At 7 back at Whitmore House, my phone vibrated with 2 messages that hit like a matched set. The bank compliance officer emailed a notice that internal footage had been preserved for the dates in question. The note used careful words about chain of custody and authenticity review. A second email from South River said a hold had been placed on 3 items, matching the appraisal photos for 7 days pending documentation. The clerk added a small line that made me sit down on the stairs. The necklace had not yet been sold because the clasp needed repair and the owner had not approved the cost. A bad man's neglect had handed me a small miracle. I carried the news to the kitchen where Eleanor was closing the day with a list. She listened with that still face she uses when joy would be quick, but wisdom tells you to stack the facts first. She poured 2 small glasses of ginger ale and touched one to mine, to paper doing what paper can do. Then she set her glass down. She said I had a call today. A man introduced himself as your father and asked about security protocols. Her mouth flattened. He asked if our back gate locks and whether staff is on site at night. He said he was worried for my safety because the neighborhood is not what it used to be. She lifted her eyes to mine, and there was no fear in them, only anger wrapped in restraint. I told him the house belongs to its owner, and the owner trusts her team. Then I ended the call. I checked the locks and turned off extra lamps. The hall felt watchful, not scared. I sat in the library bay and wrote tomorrow in 2 columns. Left side bank copies and pawn shop affidavit and Rachel at 2. Right side work plan with sash weights and first coat of quiet green before noon if the temperature holds. The house does best when I keep promises to it. So do I. At 9, Mark texted 3 words that tried to sound brave and landed like a bribe. Think this through. I laid the phone on the table and did the opposite. I thought back through the whole line of pressure. My dad rang the diner. The forged loop on my name. The magazine he tried to wield like a leash. The club speech paused mid-glow. The thumb drives with drafts of statements, using my mouth as a prop. The pawn ticket that existed somewhere with dust on it. A person can get dizzy cataloging harm. So I stood and rinsed a bowl and focused on one small clean motion. Morning broke with sun sharp as a blade. I reached the bank at 9:50 and waited with Rachel in a room lined with framed photos of ribbon cuttings. The branch manager entered with a sealed envelope and a stack of forms. She recorded the transfer of certified copies to counsel. Her hand did not shake, but the set of her jaw said this day would be long. Rachel thanked her with a gravity that matched the paper. We walked out as the clock struck 10:12, my old life and my new one measuring the same hour. On Archer, the pawn shop smelled like metal and old perfume, the kind that clings to velvet and memory. The clerk behind the glass recognized the photos immediately. He said the necklace was on a back shelf, waiting for a clasp that a man had never approved. He pointed to a camera mounted high near the cash register and said footage from last summer would take a day to pull. He handed me a carbon copy of a repair estimate with an order number and a timestamp. The numbers made me feel solid. People can lie. Numbers have a harder time of it. Back at the house, I opened the library windows to the faint winter sun and set the first coat of quiet green along the long wall. The color moved like a breath in the shade. My brush settled into that hum where the world narrows in a kind way. Eleanor stepped in once with a sandwich and a look at the bank envelope, then left me to work. The room calmed itself under my hand. Fear expands inside noise. Honesty needs less space. By noon, Rachel called. The board had started another closed session at 11:30 with counsel present. She said there would be no public statement yet. Then her voice shifted and picked up speed. A reporter from the business page had reached out to request comment and had referenced the gala interruption and a possible internal review. Rachel asked if I wanted to say anything. I said not yet. Timing is part of the truth. She agreed and asked about the pawnshop note. I read her the order number and the estimated date. She made a pleased sound that she rarely makes and said, "Chain of custody loves." Timestamps. At 1:15, I climbed the ladder to adjust a sash weight that complained when the window asked it to work. Eleanor called from the front door with a tone that made my hand stop mid-reach. She said we have company. I came down fast and found my dad standing on the marble with a smile that looked vacuum-sealed. Two men flanked him like bookends with clipboards. He said he was here to discuss a graceful exit for all parties and that he had brought independent evaluators to confirm the scope of work. I felt heat climb my spine and then cool like glass after a kiln. I said, "You do not enter this house without the owner's consent." He glanced at the ceiling in a move I know like my own hand. He called out that grace is what families do for each other and that he was offering a path. Eleanor walked forward like the house was moving through her. She told the men to leave their cards and take their clipboards outside. She told my dad she would speak only through counsel and that any further attempt to pressure staff would be documented. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The men stepped backward like a tide leaving stones. My dad stayed put, then took one step forward, as if to remind us who he had been for years. He lowered his voice and said, "You are humiliating your family." I answered without heat. My family did that work without me. He flinched as if I had struck him. He turned like a man searching for a witness and found none who would agree. He left without slamming the door, which somehow made the air steadier. After I stood in the hall with my palm flat on the cool wall, the house kept its quiet like a vow. Eleanor leaned against the newel post and let out a long breath. She said, "You did not shake." I said I did on the inside and then it passed. She nodded and smiled with just her eyes. Then she said, "Let us return to the color that tells the truth." In the late afternoon, my phone lit with a message from Mom. She said the bank had called her to confirm an internal hold and that the board had asked my dad to step back for a period that would be reviewed in 30 days. She wrote that he was angry in a way that scared her and she was staying with a friend for the night. She added one more line softer than the others. "The necklace is yours. I will help you bring it home." Dusk came on like a balm. I cleaned the brush and watched the wall dry to a calm. I could feel in my chest. I wrote a short list on the pad by the window. Pickup footage file, the pawn affidavit, send the board the repair estimate. Meet Mom tomorrow at noon to start a new kind of conversation. My phone buzzed with a final text from Lena. 10 words that tried on a different mask. "You win. Hope you are happy with yourself." I let the message sit without reply. Winning is not the word for getting your name back. I locked the front door and stood on the stoop for a slow breath. Snow ticked in the hedges. The city made its small evening sounds. I felt the keys in my pocket, the way a person feels proof. Inside, the room I had painted in quiet green held the last of the light and gave it back without drama. Tomorrow would bring paper and possibly a headline and maybe a clasp repaired. Tonight the house was steady, and so was I. I turned toward the path ready for whatever the next hour asked me to carry. The bank footage loaded on a gray monitor while a compliance officer clicked through dates like a locksmith testing pins. The image jumped, then settled on last summer, the teller window with a vase of fake tulips in the corner, and the clock reading 3:12 in the afternoon. My dad walked into frame with the easy stride he wears when he expects yes. He set a folder down and leaned in with both elbows. A teller brought out a signature card. The camera caught the angle of his wrist as he guided a pen over a line that belonged to me. The loop on the R was wrong even in grainy black and white. He slid the paper back and smiled like a man closing a sale. When the clip ended, the room felt colder. The compliance officer cleared her throat and said the originals would be preserved and that next steps would be communicated in writing. Rachel thanked her with a short nod that carried more weight than any speech. By late morning, the pawnshop fax groaned to life at Rachel's office, spitting out a page with a repair estimate and a stamp dated from last summer. The clerk had added a note in the ballpoint that said the necklace held, awaiting clasp repair. A number in the corner showed the order had never been authorized. Neglect had become my ally. Rachel sent the hold affidavit and asked the shop to secure the items in a separate bin. Then she looked at me and said gently that some things would come back intact and some things would come back as a lesson. I breathed in slowly and felt the truth of it settle like a stone that no longer burns in your hand. At noon, I met Mom at the cafe again, because that room had become a place where lies did not multiply. She looked lighter than the night before and more tired. She had brought an old photograph from my grandmother's house, the three of us in a backyard under a line of laundry, the necklace catching sun on my grandmother's throat like a soft bell. Mom set it between us as if we were laying a table. She said she had called the shop herself and said her daughter would be in tomorrow with paperwork. She said she would come with me if I wanted. I nodded. She folded her hands and whispered that she had packed a small bag and was staying with a friend for a while. I did not ask who. I said I was glad she had chosen a place where the air did not require permission. In the afternoon, the board issued a brief internal notice that reached my inbox like a weather alert. My dad had agreed to step back from daily operations for a period of 30 days while a review proceeded. It was written in the careful tone of people who understand that rooms can catch fire from a single spark. Lena texted within minutes. She wrote that this was my fault and that family loyalty meant nothing to me. I stared at the words until they looked like alphabet soup and then placed the phone face down and returned to the bay window where truth had a job. Understood. At 4, the journalist who covers white-collar cases collated and left a message with a voice that sounded like a person who keeps notes in neat handwriting. He said he had heard about a gala interruption and a temporary leadership change, and he asked if I wanted to put anything on record. Timing is part of truth. I called back and offered one sentence that did not reach for drama. I said documentation will tell a clear story, and that I was focused on protecting my name and recovering my grandmother's belongings. He asked about the pawned items. I said I would speak when the paperwork was in my hands. He thanked me and promised to keep the quote clean. Early evening, snow started in a fine dust that made the air look like it was erasing itself. Eleanor stood with me in the library and watched the quiet green walls settle. As the light faded, she said color becomes honest in low light. I said people do too. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad arrived with the kind of certainty that used to rearrange my day. Family dinner on Christmas Eve at 7 to resolve next steps. Come home and bring a level head. A second message followed within a breath. We will be moving for a while. Your place makes sense. There it was, the demand wearing the old coat of entitlement, as if my roof and my work and my keys were household property to be redistributed. The words did not make my heart race. They made my spine feel taller. I typed a simple reply. Public place only. I will attend for 30 minutes at Union Station in the small private dining room off the main hall. He answered with one word, predictable and sharp. No. I left the thread unanswered. The old script cannot run if you do not feed it lines. That night, I slept shallow and woke with clarity. The next day would be about retrieval and paper. I reached the South River when the sign in the window flipped to open. The clerk recognized me, his eyes soft with the kind of fatigue that belongs to people who handle other people's mistakes for a living. He brought out a shallow tray lined with faded velvet. The necklace lay coiled like a story that knows its own ending. The diamond drop was smaller than memory and exactly as it should be. He set it down and watched my face. I reached out and felt the cool weight in my palm, the familiar shape of the clasp that had always caught my grandmother's hair, just a little. Mom stood beside me with her hand on the glass, as if steadying herself against a tide. We completed the paperwork with the weight of the process. Rachel's affidavit, photocopies of the appraisal photos, a cashier's check for fees that were not my fault, and still mine to pay if I wanted the chain to come home. The clerk printed a receipt on thin paper that curled at the edges. He slid a small envelope across the counter and lowered his voice just a degree. He said there were 3 items on hold. The necklace, a ring with a small emerald that looked like spring, and a bracelet with a dent near the clasp. The ring had already been repaired by a jeweler across town. We would need to collect it there this afternoon. I thanked him, and he said he saw a lot of people finish transactions with tears. He preferred the way I was doing it with breath. We stepped into the winter light with the envelope tucked into Mom's coat. Snow squeaked under our shoes. She walked close and asked if I would wear the necklace someday. I said yes, and maybe not today. She nodded. Later at the jeweler, the ring gleamed with a tiny, clean face. The proprietor wrapped it in tissue and placed it in a box that creaked when it closed. Mom pressed the box to her chest for half a second and then placed it in my hand like a baton. By late afternoon, Rachel called with a new development. The board had asked for a meeting with me at 6:30 in a side room off their offices. It would be short, and the bank compliance officer would attend. Rachel said it was the kind of meeting where people ask for assurance that your spine will hold. I arrived on time and sat in a chair that had never been designed for comfort. The board president thanked me for the documentation. He said the footage and the signatures and the pawn slips had clarified their duties. He said they would be filing notices with lenders and that any statements about me consulting on company matters would be withdrawn. He looked at me in a way that resembled respect. He asked if I had any requests. I said one. If anyone asks about me, say I told the truth on paper and in person. He said we can do that. Outside the building, the cold made the air glitter in the streetlight. A text from Dad landed like a dropped dish. He would see me on Christmas Eve in the dining room whether I liked it or not. He wrote that family does not embarrass family. He wrote that I was ungrateful and being led by a woman who wanted to own me. He meant Eleanor. I felt a small heat, then let it pass. I typed my last line to him for the week. Union Station, 7:30 minutes. Bring nothing but words. Then I turned the phone off. On Christmas Eve, the station glowed with that soft holiday promise that makes even commuters slow down. I walked into the private dining room and saw the table set for 6. Silver that had known other hands, candles low enough to make faces honest. Mom sat on the left side with her shoulders drawn inward, like someone trying not to take up space. Lena arrived in red again and took a chair with the precision of a person who has practiced being watched. Mark slid into a seat near the end, eyes already on my bag like it contained leverage. My dad entered last chin high. Smile fixed like a billboard. He pulled out the head chair and waited for his audience to notice him. When no one reacted with the old awe, he sat. I set the small envelope from the pawn shop on the table and placed the jewelry box with the ring beside it. I did not speak yet. The server poured water and left in a hurry that suggested he had witnessed other families do this dance. My dad cleared his throat and started a speech about the importance of unity. He used the word legacy twice before the salad arrived. I watched his hands. They looked calm and did not feel that way at all. I waited until the plates were set down and lifted my eyes in a way that used to signal surrender. Not tonight. I laid the bank's certified copies on the tablecloth and rested my finger on the signature that was not mine. The room went quiet, but for the soft clink of a spoon against china. My dad's mouth opened and then closed. Mom stared at the page and then at me, and then at the necklace. Lena studied the ceiling like it could provide a better plot twist. I felt my breath settle. I had one sentence to deliver, and I had saved it for the moment the room would hear it. I reached for the envelope and slid the necklace into my palm. The diamond caught light and threw it back across the table onto my dad's cuff. My voice was steady and not loud. I said the house I choose to live in belongs to me, and my keys do not open your door. All the air left the room without a sound. My dad went still in a way I had never seen. Mom's hand rose to her mouth and then fell to the table. Lena's face changed color like a signal losing power. I set the necklace down between us like a boundary you could touch. The server appeared with entrees and retreated with the speed of a man who knows when heat is rising. I looked at the clock on the wall. 7:20 in the evening, 10 minutes left on my own timer. I folded my hands and waited for the first person to try to rearrange the furniture in my head. The next words would decide what tomorrow asked me to carry. The silence after my words felt like the air itself was holding its breath. My dad's fork hung midair, his face drained of that practiced calm he always wore when business went south. For the first time in my life, I watched the man who built empires with other people's sacrifices look small. His mouth moved before any sound came. "You're making a scene, Clara. Sit down. Let's talk like family." I stayed seated, my tone level. I'm not making a scene. I'm setting the record straight. The necklace is mine. My name is mine. My home is mine. You sold the first two and tried to claim the last, and I am here to tell you, you can't anymore. Lena's knife clattered against her plate. Her voice cracked as she said, "Dad, this isn't helping anyone." But her eyes flicked to me wide with something between disbelief and fear. She had spent her whole life standing in his light, never realizing that kind of light burns. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "You have no idea what's really going on. Everything I did was to save this family, to keep what's ours. Ours." That word again, the one he had used to mean his legacy, his power, his control. I said quietly, "You sold what wasn't yours to sell. You used my name because it was convenient. You took what Grandma left me and turned it into debt. And now you want my roof because yours is gone." He slammed his palm against the table. His voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Watch your tone, young lady. I built the name you're living off." Mom flinched. "I didn't." "No," I said. "You built a name for yourself. I built a life. They're not the same thing." He looked around the table for allies. None came. Even Lena stared at her napkin, her hand trembling. Mark tried to speak something about compromise, but Dad's glare stopped him cold. The room had the brittle silence of a collapsing stage. I reached into my coat pocket and placed the certified bank copies in front of him. The fake signature, the pawn ticket, the audit notice from the board. His eyes darted over the papers, recognition flickering like a fuse before it burns out. "This," I said, "is your handwriting. These are your choices. You wanted to use my name, fine. Now it's written where everyone can see it." For a long second, the only sound was the faint hum of the station outside. Then Mom spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Enough, Richard. You can't fix this by pretending it didn't happen." He turned on her, furious. "You think you understand what's at stake? You'd all be living on the street if it weren't for me." Mom lifted her chin. "We already lived without you for years." It was quieter, but it was peace. He opened his mouth, but whatever argument he'd rehearsed faltered. His shoulders sagged, his breath shallow. For a heartbeat, I saw the man behind the performance aging desperate, undone by his own pride. I stood collecting the documents and the jewelry box. My time was up. I said, "I wish you well, but I won't be a part of your cleanup. You taught me how to survive neglect. I just decided not to live in it anymore." As I turned to leave, his voice cracked behind me. "Clara, wait." I stopped at the doorway, my hand resting on the frame. "You should know," I said without looking back, "that I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because you hurt everyone else." Then I walked away. Outside, the station lights shimmered against falling snow. The cold air hit my skin like a benediction. Mom followed a few minutes later, tears streaking her cheeks, her breath forming small clouds. She wrapped her arms around me, tentative at first, then tighter. I didn't pull away. She whispered, "I should have seen it sooner." I said, "You see it now. That's what matters." We stood there until the chill turned our fingers numb. When she finally left with a cab waiting at the curb, I looked up at the grand clock above the platform. 7:45 in the evening. 10 years since the night I walked away unseen. 10 years since silence had been a punishment. That night, back at Whitmore House, the fire in the library burned steadily. Eleanor was there waiting with 2 cups of tea. She didn't ask what happened. She looked at me, saw everything in my face, and nodded once. Then she said the color dried perfectly. I smiled. I walked to the bay window, the quiet green walls reflecting a faint, golden light. The necklace rested against my collarbone. It wasn't about worth. It was about memory reclaimed weight worn with peace. Days later, a small article appeared in the paper. Local designer clears name amid financial investigation. It said little, but it said enough. The board had issued its findings. My father had been removed from his position. There was mention of restitution and legal review. No names were dragged. No blood drawn, just truth on record. Lena sent one last message. "You got what you wanted. Hope you're proud." I stared at it, then typed back. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. Pride comes after that. When the first spring thaw came, I opened every window in the house. The air carried salt and pine from the river. Whitmore House had become something more than a project. It was the shape of my own rebuilding. I hosted a small gathering that night, not for show, but for gratitude. Rachel came with her quiet humor, Eleanor with her grace, and Mom brought a bottle of wine that had waited too long to be opened. We toasted not to victory, but to peace earned the hard way. Later, alone in the library, I stood by the fire and traced the carved initials in the mantel. CW. My name, my work, my life. No one could pawn that. If you've ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you're listening from.